The crystalline walls of the great council chamber pulsed with an anxious crimson glow, reflecting the mood of its occupants perfectly. I, Commander Vex Thor of the Galactic Coalition's 7th Fleet, watched as another holographic projection of our latest defeat flickered before us. The massive chamber, usually a testament to our advanced civilization's glory, now felt like a tomb for our collective pride. Another 3 colony worlds lost High Counselor Zax Ul announced, his forearms gesturing in what we Arcosians express as extreme frustration. The Devourer Swarm adapts faster than our tactical computers can calculate. Our most sophisticated battle algorithms, useless. Our supreme technology, meaningless. I shifted uncomfortably in my hover seat, my scaled skin bristling at the truth of his words. The Devourer Swarm, true to their name, had been consuming everything in their path for the past 3 solar cycles. They were a nightmare of biological engineering gone wrong, a species that evolved purely to consume and adapt. Perhaps came a quiet voice from the lower tier. Lieutenant K-Ra, one of our youngest tactical officers, stood up. Her bioluminescent markings pulsed with nervous energy. Perhaps we're approaching this wrong. We keep trying to outthink the swarm with pure logic and technology. A dismissive laugh echoed through the chamber. And what would you suggest? Young one Admiral Thixmar's voice dripped with condescension. Should we consult the primitive species for advice? K-Ra's markings flashed defiantly. Actually, yes. I've been studying the military history of a particular Deathworld species, the humans. The chamber erupted in chaos. I watched as various counselors either laughed or expressed outrage through their species-specific gestures. Humans. Those barely space-capable bipeds from that high-gravity death trap they called Earth. Order Zax Ul's voice boomed through the chamber. Lieutenant K-Ra, explain yourself before I have you removed for wasting the Council's time. The humans. K-Ra continued, her voice stronger now, have something we lack. They've spent their entire history fighting against superior forces. Their planet tried to kill them daily, yet they survived. They fought countless wars against themselves, each time adapting, evolving their tactics. They don't rely purely on technology or algorithms. They think differently. I found myself leaning forward, my inner membranes retracting in curiosity. The swarm had been defeating us by being unpredictable, by defying our logical predictions. Could these Deathworlders, these humans, with their notorious reputation for illogical behavior, be exactly what we needed? I propose, K-Ra said, straightening to her full height, that we recruit a human military commander to lead our next campaign against the swarm. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, predictably, the chamber descended into absolute chaos. But as I watched the holographic projection of our latest defeat replay above us, a thought began forming in my mind. What did we have left to lose? Little did I know, this moment would change the course of galactic history forever. 3 solar rotations later, I stood at the grand reception hall of Nexus Prime, watching our potential salvation stride through the quantum gates. Commander Alexandra storm Blackwood was smaller than I expected, much smaller. How could something barely 2 meters tall command respect? The whispers around me matched my initial skepticism. That's the human? It looks so fragile, muttered council member Dax Rith, his crystalline form shimmering with doubt. Blackwood walked with a fluid grace that seemed to defy the higher gravity we maintained in the chamber, a small test that several council members had insisted upon. Her dark skin contrasted sharply with the stark white of her formal military uniform, and her eyes. By the cosmic core, her eyes seemed to be scanning everything, analyzing, calculating. Welcome to Nexus Prime, Commander Blackwood. High Counselor Zax Ul announced, his voice carrying that slightly condescending tone we usually reserved for primitive species. We trust your journey through the quantum corridors wasn't too overwhelming for your physiology. A smile crossed Blackwood's face, that strange baring of teeth that humans insisted wasn't a threat display. Thank you, High Counselor. The quantum corridors were fascinating, though I noticed the fluctuation harmonics in the 3rd sequence could be adjusted to increase efficiency by approximately 23.7%. The silence that followed was, as humans would say, priceless. I watched as our quantum scientists in the corner hurriedly consulted their data pads, their appendages moving in agitated patterns. "Impossible," growled Admiral Thixmar, stepping forward. "Our quantum corridor calculations are perfect. What would a Deathworlder know about?" "About quantum mechanics," Blackwood interrupted, pulling out a small holographic projector. "May I?" Before anyone could object, she activated it. A complex series of equations floated in the air, annotated with observations about our quantum corridor system that made our leading scientists' eye stalks quiver with excitement. "On Earth, we learned early that survival sometimes means understanding things far beyond our immediate needs," Blackwood continued, her voice carrying an edge of steel. "When your planet tries to kill you with everything from microscopic organisms to massive geological events, you learn to master every tool at your disposal." She gestured to the hologram, which now showed a tactical display of our recent battles against the Devourer Swarm. "Just like you're doing exactly what these swarm creatures expect, fighting with pure logic and predictable patterns. They're biological computers, evolving to counter each strategy you throw at them. But humans." She smiled again, and this time there was something predatory about it. "We're chaos theorists with an evolutionary mandate to survive." The chamber had gone completely still. Even the most skeptical council members were paying attention now. I found myself leaning forward, my scales tingling with an unfamiliar sensation: hope. "So," Blackwood said, clasping her hands behind her back, "shall we discuss how to introduce a little chaos into your perfect military machine?" Looking around the chamber, I saw the same realization dawning on every face, every crystalline surface, every bioluminescent pattern. Perhaps what we needed wasn't another logical solution. Perhaps what we needed was something the swarm could never predict: human unpredictability. And judging by the glint in Commander Blackwood's eyes, she had plenty of chaos to share. The emergency alert shattered the artificial night cycle of Nexus Prime. Red warning holograms blazed through every corridor of the Great Council chamber, and I rushed from my quarters, my scales still adjusting to sudden wakefulness. The news was worse than we feared. "The Devourer Swarm has adapted again," Intelligence Officer Rindar announced, her tentacles writhing with distress as she projected the tactical display. "They've developed a new biological countermeasure against our quantum shielding. 3 major colony worlds are in immediate danger: Crystallos Prime, New Arcos, and the Lumarian homeworld." The council chamber erupted into panic. Representatives from each threatened species began talking over each other, their various biological features displaying signs of extreme agitation. The crystalline Lumarians were literally cracking with stress, their normally pristine surfaces showing fracture patterns. "Deploy the 3rd Fleet to Crystallos Prime," demanded Council Member Dax Rith, his crystalline form pulsing with desperate light. "Our world must be protected first." "The 3rd Fleet," spat Admiral Thixmar. "Your world? New Arcos has twice the population and 3 times the strategic value. The fleet must protect our primary shipyards." "The Lumarian homeworld is the source of our quantum technology," another voice shouted. "Without our expertise, the entire coalition will collapse." I watched as centuries of political cooperation threatened to shatter under the weight of fear. Commander Blackwood stood in the center of this chaos, her expression unreadable. The human hadn't spoken since the emergency alert began. "The 3rd Fleet was destroyed 12 minutes ago," Blackwood's voice cut through the noise like a plasma blade. The chamber fell silent. "Your traditional tactics failed. Again." The tactical display shifted, showing the burning wreckage of our most advanced ships. The swarm had developed specialized boarding pods that could pierce our quantum shielding as if it were paper. Our mighty dreadnoughts had been torn apart from the inside out. "You're still fighting the last war," Blackwood continued, stepping forward, "still thinking like immortal beings with unlimited resources and time. But right now, you need to think like humans, like creatures who've spent their entire existence one step away from extinction." "And what would you suggest?" High Counselor Zaxol asked, his 4 arms crossed in defensive posture. "That we abandon our technological advantage, fight like primitives." Blackwood's laugh sent chills down my spine. "Primitives? Your mighty fleets are being devoured by biological weapons, and you call us primitives? Humanity fought itself with biological weapons centuries ago. We learned how to counter them, how to think like them, how to break them." She walked to the tactical display, her fingers dancing through the holographic interface. The swarm thinks it's fighting an advanced civilization. But what if, instead, it found itself fighting something far more dangerous? Something that had clawed its way up from the mud of a death world. Something that had survived every apocalypse its own species could create. The display changed, showing a battle strategy that made several council members gasp in horror. It was brutal, primitive, and completely illogical. It went against every principle of advanced warfare we had developed over millennia. "This is barbaric," whispered Lieutenant K. Ra, but I noticed her bioluminescent pattern showing intrigue rather than disgust. Barbaric Blackwood smiled that predatory smile again. The swarm adapts to patterns, to logic, to technology. But there's one thing it can never adapt: to human unpredictability. We're going to show them what real chaos looks like. Looking at the battle plan, I finally understood why humans were classified as deathworlders. It wasn't their biology that made them dangerous. It was their minds, forged in the fires of constant survival, that made them the perfect weapon against the swarm. The question was, could the coalition survive its own prejudices long enough to let humanity save us? Commander Blackwood stood before the Coalition War Council, her presence somehow filling the massive chamber, despite her small stature. The holographic display sprang to life, showing scenes that made my scales ripple with confusion. Primitive beings fighting in what appeared to be the most inefficient ways possible. "This," Blackwood said, pointing to a group of fighters hiding in dense vegetation, "is guerrilla warfare. A tactic humanity perfected over thousands of years. When faced with superior forces, we learn to strike from shadows, to withdraw, to let the enemy exhaust themselves chasing ghosts." Admiral Thixmar snorted, his cranial ridges flushing with dismissal. "You expect us to hide? The Coalition fleet does not cower in shadows like prey species." "No," Blackwood responded, her voice sharp. "I expect you to survive. Your mighty fleet, fighting in perfect formation, is exactly what the swarm expects. They adapt to patterns, so we give them none." The holographic display shifted, showing a new simulation. Coalition ships, but moving in ways that defied conventional logic. Small wolf packs striking from fold space, destroying swarm ships and vanishing before retaliation could come. "Humans learned these tactics fighting against ourselves," Blackwood continued, pacing the chamber. "Vietnam, Afghanistan, countless theaters of war where superior forces were defeated by inferior numbers using superior tactics. The art of the ambush, the false retreat, the bait and trap." Lieutenant K. Ra stepped forward, her bioluminescence pulsing with excitement. "Show them the simulation you showed me, Commander. The one with the honeypot strategy." Blackwood smiled, and the display changed again. This time, it showed a seemingly vulnerable coalition colony. Rich in resources, poorly defended, a perfect target for the swarm. But as the simulation played out, the trap became apparent. Hidden antimatter mines in asteroid fields, quantum-shifted battleships emerging from camouflage positions, and strikes from directions that violated standard military doctrine. "Your current tactics are like trying to stop a flood with a single wall," Blackwood explained. "I'm proposing we become the water instead. Fluid, adaptable, everywhere and nowhere. The swarm thinks it's fighting an advanced civilization bound by rules and logic. Let's show them what happens when those rules break." "But our formations, our battle computers," protested one of the elder counselors. "Centuries of tactical doctrine will get you all killed," Blackwood cut in. "Your battle computers are predicting based on logical outcomes. The swarm has already learned to counter that. But try predicting this." The holographic display erupted with chaos. Coalition ships performing maneuvers that seemed suicidal, until they weren't. Deliberate system failures that turned into traps. Weapons fired at seemingly wrong targets that created chain reactions through swarm formations. Young officers like K. Ra were moving closer, their species-specific expressions showing growing enthusiasm. I watched as several tactical officers began taking notes, their appendages moving rapidly across data pads. "This is how humanity survived on Earth," Blackwood continued. "Not by being the strongest, or the fastest, or even the smartest. We survived by being the most adaptable, the most unpredictable. When the enemy expects you to advance, you retreat. When they expect retreat, you charge. When they expect strength, show weakness. When they expect weakness." The simulation showed a small group of apparently damaged coalition ships limping away from a swarm fleet. The swarm, following their programming, moved to consume the easy prey. Then, the trap sprung. The damaged ships detonated their quantum cores in a precisely calculated pattern, creating a cascade of spatial ruptures that tore the swarm fleet apart. By all tactical logic, sacrificing ships is wasteful, Blackwood said softly. But humans learned long ago that sometimes you must lose a battle to win a war. The swarm's greatest weakness is its own perfection. It expects its enemies to try to preserve themselves, to fight efficiently, to follow logical patterns. It cannot comprehend an enemy willing to sacrifice pieces of itself for victory. I found myself nodding, understanding finally dawning. The coalition had been fighting like immortals, treating every ship, every resource as too precious to risk. But humanity, with their brief lifespans and constant brush with extinction, had learned a harder lesson. Sometimes survival meant being willing to bleed. The question, Blackwood concluded, her eyes sweeping the chamber, is whether the mighty coalition is willing to learn how to fight dirty. Because I promise you this, the swarm won't expect it, and that's exactly why it will work. The chamber buzzed with excited conversation, primarily from the younger officers. The older members still looked skeptical, but I could see the growing realization in their expressions. We had been fighting a war of technology. Perhaps it was time to fight a war of survival instead. Never in my cycles of military service had I seen anything like this. From my command post aboard the Coalition flagship Guardian Light, I watched Commander Blackwood's strategy unfold. The massive holographic display showed our forces scattered across 3 star systems in what appeared to be complete disarray. To any conventional military mind, it looked like the prelude to a massacre. Swarm fleet approaching through quantum space, Lieutenant K. Ra announced, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with nervous energy. Multiple biosignatures. Largest concentration we've ever encountered. Blackwood stood at the center of the command deck, her small frame dwarfed by the alien technology surrounding her. Right on schedule. They think we're vulnerable. Divided. Time to show them why that was a mistake. She turned to Admiral Thixmar. Admiral, commence Operation Honeypot. The Admiral's cranial ridges flushed dark with concern, but he gave the order. Our seemingly scattered forces began broadcasting false distress signals. Damaged engine signatures, radiation leaks. We were presenting ourselves as wounded prey, and the swarm was about to take the bait. The human strategy goes against every principle of space combat, muttered one of my fellow commanders. We should be consolidating our forces, presenting a unified defense. I watched as the massive swarm fleet split into smaller groups, each moving to engage what they perceived as easy targets. Their biological ships, resembling massive crystalline insects, moved with perfect tactical precision. Too perfect. Too predictable. Now Blackwood commanded, her voice carrying an edge of anticipation. Spring the trap. What happened next defied conventional warfare. Our supposedly damaged ships suddenly executed maneuvers that should have torn them apart. The Lumarian vessels, using their crystalline technology in ways never before attempted, began resonating at frequencies that disrupted the swarm's biological communications. Our Koshian warships emerged from fold space at impossible angles, their weapon systems firing in patterns that seemed random but created devastating chain reactions through the swarm formations. By the cosmic core, K. Ra breathed, her markings blazing with excitement. They're actually falling for it. The swarm ships, programmed to adapt to logical attack patterns, found themselves facing something their biological computers couldn't process: human chaos. When they adjusted to defend against attacks from one direction, our forces struck from another. When they attempted to predict our movement patterns, they found none to analyze. Quantum signatures detecting swarm adaptation attempt, Rindar reported from her station, tentacles working multiple interfaces simultaneously. They're trying to evolve countermeasures. But Blackwood's predatory smile returned. Perfect. Time for Phase 2. Execute Operation Thunderstorm. The next sequence of events would be talked about in coalition military academies for generations to come. Our forces, seemingly in retreat, left behind what appeared to be disabled ships. The swarm, following their programming, moved to consume these easy resources. But these ships weren't disabled. They were bombs. The detonations ripped holes in space-time itself, creating quantum turbulence that shredded the swarm's biological hulls. Their adaptive capabilities, their greatest strength, became their weakness. As they evolved to resist the quantum disruption, they became more vulnerable to conventional weapons. Multiple swarm ships showing signs of biological confusion, Kara reported, her voice rising with excitement. Their hive mind network is destabilizing. The battle descended into what humans would call beautiful chaos. Coalition ships performed maneuvers that violated every principle of formation combat. We attacked when we should have defended, retreated when we should have advanced, and sacrificed positions that seemed crucial only to turn them into traps. Swarm fleet attempting to regroup, Rindar announced. They're trying to consolidate their remaining forces. Not this time, Blackwood said quietly. Execute Operation Wildfire. The final phase of the battle was nothing short of artistic destruction. Hidden antimatter mines, placed days earlier in seemingly random patterns, activated in sequences that drove the swarm ships into killing zones. Our capital ships, their quantum cores modified according to Blackwood's specifications, generated interference patterns that turned space itself into a weapon. The mighty swarm, terror of the galaxy, found itself fighting an enemy it couldn't predict, couldn't adapt to, couldn't understand. For the first time in recorded history, we watched swarm ships attempting to retreat rather than adapt. By all tactical logic, this should not be working, Admiral Thexmar said, his voice filled with wonder. Yet here we are, winning against the greatest threat our coalition has ever faced, using strategies that would make a first-year cadet cringe. That's exactly why it works, Blackwood replied, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. The swarm evolved to counter logic, technology, and predictable patterns, but they never evolved to counter human insanity. As the last swarm ships were destroyed or scattered, a cheer went up through the command deck. Species-specific expressions of joy filled the space, flashing bioluminescence, resonating crystals, vibrating appendages. We had done it. We had won our first major victory against the swarm. And we had done it by learning to think like humans. By embracing chaos, accepting sacrifice, and turning our backs on millennia of logical, orderly combat doctrine. Looking at Commander Blackwood's satisfied expression, I realized that this victory was more than just a turning point in the war. It was the beginning of a new era in coalition warfare. The mood in the war room shifted as Commander Blackwood activated a new holographic display. The previous victories, impressive as they were, had only been setting the stage for something bigger. Much bigger. Every punch we've thrown, Blackwood explained, her hands moving through the holographic data, has been teaching the swarm to dodge in exactly the way we want. You see, while they were adapting to our apparent strategies, they were actually falling into the biggest trap of all. Intelligence Officer Rindar's tentacles suddenly went rigid. The biological markers, they're changing across the entire swarm fleet. Blackwood nodded, that dangerous smile playing across her face. Humanity learned something vital during our own biological wars. Sometimes the best way to defeat an adaptive enemy is to make them adapt themselves to death. The display showed the evolutionary patterns of the swarm over our recent battles. With each engagement, they had modified their biological structures to counter our tactics. But now, watching the pattern as a whole, I saw something astonishing. Every adaptation had pushed them further from their original form, made them more specialized, more vulnerable. The swarm's greatest strength is its ability to evolve, Lieutenant Kara said, her bioluminescence pulsing with sudden understanding. But you've turned that strength into a weakness. Precisely, Blackwood replied. We've been herding them down an evolutionary dead end. Each adaptation required more energy, more resources, more specialized biological structures. And now. She pressed a control, and a new tactical overlay appeared. Now they're perfectly adapted to fight the war we were fighting yesterday, but completely vulnerable to what we're about to do today. Admiral Thexmar's cranial ridges darkened with appreciation. The quantum frequency shifts, the scattered attacks, the apparent tactical mistakes. Every move was calculated to push their evolution in this direction. The next series of events unfolded with breathtaking speed. Coalition ships, now moving with practiced human unpredictability, struck at the swarm's newly developed vulnerabilities. Ships that had learned to work together in wolf packs, adopting human pack hunting tactics, tore through the over-specialized swarm vessels. "Look at our crews," K-Ra breathed in amazement. "They're fighting like humans now." She was right. Across the fleet, coalition crews were making split-second decisions, taking calculated risks, embracing controlled chaos. The rigid command structure had evolved into something more fluid, more adaptable, more deadly. The swarm, for the first time in recorded history, seemed confused. Their biological computers, optimized for countering logical patterns, foundered in the face of opponents who now thought and fought with human unpredictability. "Send the signal," Blackwood commanded. "All ships, execute final gambit." The coalition fleet moved as one, but not in the precise formations of our past. They moved like predators, like hunters, like survivors, like humans. The swarm fleet, trapped in their over-specialized forms, couldn't adapt fast enough to this final, devastating change in tactics. As I watched the battle unfold, I realized that Commander Blackwood hadn't just taught us new tactics. She had taught us a new way of thinking. The coalition forces had learned to embrace chaos, to think like deathworlders, to fight with the desperate creativity that had kept humanity alive on their harsh world. The swarm had evolved to fight a logical, predictable enemy. Instead, they found themselves facing an entire coalition that had learned to think like humans. And that, as it turned out, was something they could never adapt to overcome. Standing in the Great Council chamber once again, I could hardly believe how much had changed. The crystalline walls now pulsed with victorious golden light, a far cry from the anxious crimson of our first meeting. Commander Blackwood stood before the assembled coalition leadership, accepting the highest military honor our civilization could bestow. "To think," High Counselor Zax-Ul mused, all four arms gesturing in what we now recognized as profound respect. "We once considered humans too primitive to lead, too volatile to trust with coalition forces." "Sometimes," Blackwood responded, running her fingers over the crystalline metal. "The most primitive solution is the most effective one. Humanity never had the luxury of perfect technology or unlimited resources. We had to learn to improvise, to adapt, to think beyond conventional wisdom just to survive." Lieutenant K-Ra, recently promoted to fleet commander, stepped forward. Her bioluminescent patterns glowed with pride. "The Coalition Academy has already begun incorporating human tactical doctrine into our training programs. We're teaching our officers to think like survivors, not just commanders." The changes went far beyond military strategy. Throughout coalition space, the success of human leadership had sparked a revolution in thinking. Species that once looked down on primitive races now sought their counsel. The age-old prejudice against deathworlders had given way to a new appreciation for their unique perspectives. The swarm taught us the dangers of perfect logic, Admiral Thexmar admitted, his cranial ridges flushed with humility. But humanity taught us the power of controlled chaos. Together, we're stronger than either of us could be alone. Looking around the chamber, I saw the future taking shape. Humans and coalition species working together, each bringing their unique strengths to face whatever challenges awaited us among the stars. We had gained more than victory over the swarm. We had gained wisdom. Commander Blackwood caught my eye and gave that now familiar predatory smile. So she asked, ready to show the galaxy what else humans and the coalition can accomplish together. I found myself returning her smile, my scales rippling with anticipation. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would we. After all, we had learned to think like humans, and that made us unstoppable.